Hello and welcome to Beneath the Surface. Glad you could join us tonight. Paul Murano here with my very special guest tonight, who is a Beneath the Surface regular but hasn't been on BTS for a while, Mr. Kent Niebuhr. Kent, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. It's very good to be back. It's been a while, but
Yes.
I'm recharged and ready to go.
I'd say it's been about 3 whiles. Maybe
At least.
Yeah, maybe 2.5.
Good. I was going to say 3.5. Yeah.
Oh, 3. Okay. Well, Beneath the Surface, where faith and reason meets. And tonight, our topic is the election from a Catholic perspective. Now, we are actually in the midst of doing a series on the Creed, but we're just pausing that a little bit because everyone's thinking about and talking about the election. Now, we are recording this show. If you're listening to this later, this is important to hear. We're recording this show on the night of November 8th, where the election has been called by the networks, but there are still a lot of lawsuits that are going to go forth beginning tomorrow from the Trump administration. So you who are listening knows how all of that went down. Good for you, because you're in our future. We don't know how all of that's going to go down, how all that's going to play out. But right now, all we know is that the networks have called it for Joe Biden, and here we are tonight. So on that note,
and to be even more specific, it is 7:42 Eastern Standard Time, because it seems like we're on a 24-hour news cycle here.
I'm telling you, it changes every moment.
Right.
All right, Kent, how has this, okay, let's just, right off the bat, you are a practicing Orthodox Catholic, as I am, as many of the audience is, not all of the audience. How is this affecting you as both an American citizen and as a Catholic?
Well, I mean, I think what we've seen in this country politically in probably the past century, at least, is that the entire political spectrum has moved to the left a lot. It seemed to gradually just move more and more and more to the left. And it seems like in the past decade or 2 decades, that shift has accelerated. And so we're to a point where really what we're facing is socialism, or even there is a vast part of the electorate, I don't know if vast is the right word, but a substantial part of the electorate, a notable part of the electorate, who is calling for full-on communism.
Now,
so,
would you say, Kent, sorry to interrupt you, but
please.
But this is an important point here. Would you say that this has been brought about perhaps primarily, or at least secondarily, by the breakdown of the family?
I think it's yes. The short answer is yes, but I think that's just one component in all of this. I think really what you can do, I mean, there's a reason why communistic movements are workers' movements, right? Or at least historically they have been. So you with the Industrial Revolution, you take the father out of the home. Now he's working in the factory 12-hour days, right?
Yep.
So he is absentee father, not because he wants to, because he wants to. The reason why he leaves the home is to care for his family.
Sure.
And he walks back home and he eats a meal and goes to bed, and he gets up and he does it again, right? So all of a sudden, he's out of the home for 12 hours a day, and the time that he is at home, he's probably exhausted. He's not raising the children. He's not imparting himself to the children. So right away, the Industrial Revolution compromises fatherhood.
Separated the father from the child. Then came the pill and the
well,
late
even
60s,
before that,
early 70s.
Even before that, you get World War II, where all the dads are off fighting the war, and the moms go into the factory.
Now they have to.
Now who's raising the kids at home? Grandma, grandpa, auntie, so-and-so, or whatever.
Right.
Now they're raising the kids at home. So now these kids are growing up without, in effect, or practically without a mom, without a dad. Right?
But that was an exception to the rule, because there was
Correct.
a war going on. When the guys came home, things got a bit more traditional. Everybody remembers the 1950s and the TV shows that depict it and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But then came the sexual revolution, inaugurated by the birth control pill, and then all of that became the norm. Now you have the family that's all over the place. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Right.
now you have,
And
so
divorce became normalized.
it's all part and parcel of the same thing. So you have World War II, all the horrors of World War II, not to mention, I mean, the deaths and dads who
Yeah.
didn't come home. And then you have, we're just going to drown our sorrows, just like the roaring 20s after World War I. We're just going to party the 50s, for
Right.
mainstream America or whatever you want to call it. We're just like, hey, just let's have a good time, prosperity, etc. We are the greatest nation on earth. And so we got into really this, I would call it like a hedonism, or at least a proto-hedonism. Okay. And then you have the 60s where everybody's like, hey, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to have to, like my grandparents' generation who always tried to do the right thing. I just want to do what makes me feel good. And the phrase out of the 60s was, if it feels good, do it. Now, for a lot,
and as well as do your own thing, which
do
matches,
your own thing. If it feels good, do it. Yeah.
Yep.
And practically speaking, when you say, if it feels good, do it, what you're really saying is, if it feels good, it is good. So therefore, what's the via negativa? The converse of that is if it feels bad, it is bad. If it feels bad,
in other words, sacrifice is bad, and like you said,
suffering of any kind,
and hedonism is good.
Exactly.
That's where all of that comes from. Yeah.
Right. And you have these women who were outside of working out of the home, Rosie the Riveter in World War II, when dad was off, they're like, hey, if I can work in a factory in World War II, why can't I work now? So now you have the women's liberation equality movement. And the form that takes is women trying to just function in society as men. They're trying to take what has always been men's role, not take it away from them, but they want the same identity. They want the same identity, right? So now you have men and women competing for the same jobs. So rather than having men and women being complementary, you have them being competitors. And so one thing about the male is that he can have sexual intercourse with people and not get pregnant. So therefore, if we're competitors, men and women, then we got to level the playing field. So now we need birth control. And because birth control fails, now we need abortion. And the other thing is if a man can get a woman pregnant and walk away, then a woman has to be able to walk away.
Yeah.
So now we have no fault divorce.
All of that is so true. Women became quasi-men because they were told to, and the pill enabled them to do that. So now you have men and quasi-men in society, and because human nature demands an equilibrium, because they became quasi-men, eventually men became quasi-women.
Right.
And so now you have the whole transgender movement, we can do a whole show on all of that, but the bottom line here is that things are so imbalanced that
it's manifesting itself,
and that the divorce culture, the abortion culture, the fornication culture, all the things we just talked about have broken up the family in a way that I think today's generations are saying, we want stability, we want security. Where do we get the governments? The family's broke. It can't depend on the family. The more and more that happens, the more and more you depend on the government. Socialism doesn't seem like all that much of a bad idea for today's young people. Makes sense?
And here's the other thing. In order to do your own thing, in order to follow if it feels good, do it, in order to contracept, to abort, and to divorce, you have to reject traditional Christianity, particularly Catholicism.
You've got to reject God, and you've got to reject your own human nature, which are one and the same in the sense that if you reject God, you do reject yourself without realizing it.
Yes, absolutely. And if you're going to, as a feminist, if you're going to think feminism is bad, I have to be more like a man, which is a mistake. Being a woman is bad. I have to be more like a man. I heard somebody say recently that they noticed in their corporation that the higher a woman was up on the corporate ladder, the shorter her hair got.
Okay, we'll have to think about that one a little more.
Right. The point is now you have, in other words, all of this has to be implicit in it is anti-authority, right? And God, the church, is an authority, so you have to reject that.
But the funny thing is, the funny thing is, Kent, that they're not necessarily rejecting the government because they want the government to take over the vacuum. That's what socialism basically is. All of these good authorities like God and family being erased
supplanted,
and supplanted by eventually the government.
Right. And here's why. Because you have, when you're against authority, what you have to do is, you realize the only way to implement my worldview is to impose it. Therefore, guess what we need? We need an authority. But it has to be,
even though we hate authority.
Exactly. Remember in the 60s, there was this expression, don't trust anyone over 30.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Question authority. This was on bumper stickers. I remember seeing this as a kid. Question authority, right? No so once you get there, what you're doing is all you're really doing is undermining the existing authority. In other words, traditional Judeo-Christian values and traditional Judeo-Christian authority. And you're saying, we're just going to erase that, supplant it gradually over the past, let's say, 50 years, and we're going to replace it with the anti-church, the anti-Christianity.
The bottom line is, when you ignore or reject God or never knew him, these things, these anti-God things, have to take their place, has to supplant them. And I think what you might be saying here is that in 2020, a lot of people, including particularly young people, have voted for the Biden-Harris ticket because of all of this, that they represent the party which will give them that kind of authority to usurp the traditional kinds of authority, like family, marriage, virtue, and ultimately God.
Yeah, and let's face it, marriage is, to enter into a marriage is to live under an authority. The marriage itself has demands that go along with it. You can't be married in any real sense of the word and have like an open marriage. You can't be married and do your own thing. You have to do the we thing as opposed to the me thing, right?
Yeah. You literally become a we.
You become a we. You are no longer an I.
Yeah, I mean, you are an I, but within the context of a we. So you've got two I's in a we, and if you have children, you have another I. So you have three I's in a we, and of course, I know you know where I'm going with this. This reflects the Holy Trinity himself, who are three I's or three persons in one being, just like the family is one being. But that's another whole show. Let's get back to the election. I don't want to get.
So yes. How does all this manifest itself in what we're seeing in this whole election cycle, right? So what we're really seeing is this anti-authority authority being, well, we could get into the whole how much voter fraud, election fraud there is.
That was going to be my next question.
Yes, but even if you take it at face value and say Biden won, then
he at least won the popular vote by a couple of million.
Yeah, if we trust the ballots, if we
trust that,
Right. So, but just without getting into that, if he won, it's sort of a victory for the do your own thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's imposed. It turns out that what is being implemented, I won't even say imposed, what is being implemented is an exclusion or a tyranny or a suppression or an oppression of anyone who says, wait a second, life is not about doing your own thing. If you're going to be married, life is not about doing your own thing. If you're going to have children, life is not about doing your own thing. You have a responsibility now. You need to be responsible to and for and with your spouse. You have kids, you need to be responsible to and for and with your kids. So what we have is, that's why Black Lives Matter had on their website, and I've heard that it's taken down, that they are intent on the destruction of the traditional family structure.
The Western family structure, the nuclear family, yes.
This is exactly
that's what they said.
Right.
Yeah, they'll probably put it back up now that the election's over.
But because they feel they won.
All right, so let's take a breath for a second and think about where we are right now. Let's imagine that Trump's lawsuits and the recounts and all of that, nothing occurs, nothing happens, but let's say Biden becomes president on January 20th. All right. where are we going? Where will this country be in 4 years, 5 years, 10 years? Where are we going? And just sum it up for me. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I will say it's very hard to predict. But if you can look backwards and use that as a template, where have we been going? As I started out by saying we've been shifting left for at least 50 years. I would go back even further. But we've been shifting left, the whole society, whether it's political or social, in terms of
I know that.
morals and just government.
Let me just ask you this more specifically. If there is no satisfying, if the political right is not satisfied that this was not completely manipulated, whether it be from China, from our left, from the media, from all of the above, and much more, then we're going to have half the country extremely unhappy with this election, just like half were with Trump, except for better reason. There was no real fraud with the Trump election. This people are not convinced that there is not widespread fraud at this point.
Right.
Is this going to be a presidency that lasts? What's going to happen in the next 4 years?
Well, I think sooner or later, Kamala will be the president. I don't see Joe Biden's health holding up very long at all. I mean, my goodness, it could be weeks, or literally could be weeks from what he looks like. So President Harris is pretty much what we're expecting. And so what you're talking about is, in the population, grassroots level, what is life going to look like? First of all, I think that liberals, Democrats, people who voted for Biden will believe that they have a mandate to tyrannize Trump supporters.
Now, when you say tyrannize, does it begin with the First Amendment? Does it begin with free speech?
I think absolutely anything that falls outside of what they consider right and acceptable will be defined as hate speech.
Right.
And so, in other words, to be conservative, to be Catholic, to be a Trump supporter, to be Republican, even. Well, I hesitate there because there are what are typically called rhinos, Republicans in name only.
Yeah, I don't think it's being. I think it's saying and doing.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It doesn't matter what you are.
You can hold this to internally, but once you start acting on it, that's where you fall afoul
or speaking.
Speaking, acting. Right, I consider speech action, expression.
Do you agree with me that probably the first thing to go will be our freedom of speech with regard to natural law and the issues on human sexuality?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that already.
I mean, right now it's the doing the baking of the cakes and the pastry folks, and of course Facebook has, and Twitter and all that has their censors going on. But I think as soon as somebody speaks about saying something like a homosexual act is intrinsically disordered, or I don't know, just premarital sex or contraception, and abortion and divorce, and the things that we talked about that began to be accepted in our culture in the 1970s. Those things are going to become so sacrosanct in the culture and the religion of the left that it will be seen as blasphemy, and there will probably be penalties. Yes,
I would say we are already there. If you look at what's happening in the public schools,
but I mean severe penalties.
Well, think of this:
not just being canceled from a job.
Right. You could be fined, imprisoned, whatever. So think about this. If a kindergarten, I was talking to a elementary school nurse. If a kindergartner walks into the nurse's office, and let's say it's a boy, and he says, I think I'm a girl, immediately that sets into motion a series of basically sex change. So this boy is going to be put on this conveyor belt to become, quote unquote, become a girl. And the parents can absolutely not interfere with this process.
Not even
That's
the parents.
already the law. That's already the law. Okay. And
that is tyranny.
The APA, the American Psychiatric Association, has already defined this tendency, homosexuality, transgenderism, as normal. Right. They have already define that. So what do you appeal to as a parent, or even as an objective observer who says this is not the case, this would not be normal? Where do you appeal to? It's already the law of the land, homosexual marriage, right? So implicitly there's nothing wrong, there's nothing abnormal, I should say, with homosexual tendencies, same-sex attraction. So the law already accepts it as normal. The APA already accepts it as normal. Where do you go? There is no appeal to this.
All right, now that's the case now under a Trump administration. How is it going to be ramped up under a Harris administration?
I think it's what you're saying, or what I believe you're saying, is that it will be illegal to hold an opposing position. In other words, it's like treasonous, you could say.
So then the real church will become illegal in our country.
Correct. Catholicism will become illegal because Catholicism does teach that homosexuality is some form of a disorder, whether it's psychological, biochemical.
So now you have a cafeteria Catholic as a president. Now you don't think that he's going to remain, but suppose he does for a bit. Cafeteria Catholic as a president. These leftists don't really care much about cafeteria Catholics because they follow the party line.
Because they're liberal, right?
They shut up about the important issues, the basic life issues, and they don't mention them. In fact, they probably don't even believe in the church teaching.
Correct.
They probably don't.
Correct.
Most of them. Well, what do you think will happen with the church in the next 4, perhaps, or even 8 years in a Harris administration?
I would not be surprised if it literally became illegal, or we had something along the lines of what exists in China. There's the state-approved, quote-unquote, Catholic Church. I forgot what they call it, the National Catholic Church or something like that, which is not correct. But
patriotic,
there you go. And then there's the underground church, where authentic Catholics who are holding the Catholic faith that as it's been taught for 2,000 years.
Which, of course, the Pope has done a little something about to try to bring them together.
Which
perhaps
is
not
really
successfully.
No, bringing them together means undermining the actual Catholic faith, because you can't bring it together. They're irreconcilable. They cannot be reconciled by nature.
You see something like that occurring here. I mean, it's almost that way now, where you have the Church of Nice, which is 85% of the church. And then you have real Catholics that are, spiced in, if you will, with the Church of Nice and not really being fulfilled. We almost have that here, whereas real Catholics have to be quiet, especially if you work in the church, like as a DRE or as a pastoral associate or as a music minister or what have you. You'll immediately get fired. And if you want some stories about that, I have about 10 of them. With regard to that, the cancel culture has been alive and well in the Catholic Church for at least 2 decades.
Absolutely.
But what I'm saying is, we almost have that now. You think that it's going to become more out in the open?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. In other words, it will be illegal to hold to the catechism, essentially. You take the catechism, and it will be, what's that phrase when they, where they black out certain things? I forgot the phrase, the name escapes me. Redacted. Certain passages of the catechism will be redacted. They will black out certain passages of the catechism. And it's not just homosexuality. There will be other, like contraception, abortion.
Sure. Oh, yeah. All so the natural law issues.
And then, so you'll have the patriotic Catholic Association is what you'll have, and which is nothing, which is not Catholicism. So, and then in effect, you'll have an underground church of sorts. I don't know how it would materialize, but I mean, I don't think the faithful Catholic priests or the faithful Catholic bishops, not that there are many of them, but I don't think that they would sit idle. And neither would the faithful laity. They would say, how are we going to do this? How do we navigate this very terrible time? Because there's a long tradition of that in the Catholic Church. For the entire 2,000 years of the Catholic Church, at least in one place or another, the church is suppressed. So there has, in the entire 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church, there has always been an underground church somewhere. And it would be coming here, or I should say it's highly likely that it would be coming here.
Let me just take a giant step backwards in our conversation and ask you this. Do you think anything positive is going to come out of Trump's legal challenges in the next week?
You know, well, could he prevail? I suppose he could prevail. And then that would do what? I think from the sounds of the nature of the election fraud, I think we just have to have the election all over again. And that ballots would have to be on, the new ballots would have to be on, like, I don't know, yellow paper or something like that to distinguish them from the ballots from the invalid election, et cetera. So I think we'd have to have another election. I think it would have to start from scratch. And I don't know, what do you have? Do you have the military monitoring the vote counts? I don't know.
Every single place, every single poll. I mean, how do you do that?
I don't know. I don't know.
We are so, it seems to me, we are so vulnerable as a society,
Yes.
as a utilizing this kind of democracy.
Yep.
Because it is so vulnerable to cheating.
Corruption. Right.
It's so vulnerable to cheating that you really can't stop it. And even if we're absolutely convinced that there was widespread cheating and corruption in this particular, how do you prove it?
Right.
Now, the only thing that I know that is going on at this point, in November 8th, 2020, is that Justice Alito has told the states, particularly Pennsylvania, to separate all of the votes that came in after Election Day, either on or after Election Day. And so if those votes will be discounted, if Trump is successful to get this thing all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court says we cannot, because it's unconstitutional, count these votes, and then it says, well, because we're a nation, this has to apply to all the states, then you're talking about these battleground states taking away lots of their late votes. And perhaps Trump has a chance then to take.
I don't even know if that can be done. Can that even be done? Were they all just thrown together in the same pile, right? So this is why I think what it would come to is we would have to have the election again. And I think what it would have to come to also is you must vote in person.
So not just recounts. You're talking about re-election.
Exactly. Do-over.
And for the entire country or just for the battleground states? Suppose you're the Supreme Court right now.
Yes, I would say that, man, I don't know if it would necessitate the entire country, but I would say it might come down to something along the line, not battleground states, but something along the lines of where there is reasonable cause to suspect fraud. In those states, it must be recounted. For instance, where I live, the town that I live in, and I live in a very liberal state that always goes Democrat, always. Yeah. But the town that I live in and the neighboring town, in the last election, they both went for Trump. This year, they both went for Biden, which is extremely odd, knowing the kind of culture where I live. That's extremely odd. Now, I don't know that it would make a difference in my state, but perhaps there was some fraud here too.
Yeah, so you intuit that there might have been fraud there.
That's my hunch. That's my sense of it.
And that's and a lot of that is going on now. We see the improbability of so many different things around these states, and we're saying to ourselves, I mean, if it smells like a pig, and if it looks like a pig, and it, if it tastes like a pig, it must be a pig.
I watched a video today that was produced yesterday that said the statistical probability of all these, found ballots being for Biden is 0.000000189. So that's 5 zeros. 189. So in other words, 1 in 53 million chance. So you have to look at that and say, bogus.
And there are a lot of states that have gone for Republican congressman, Republican Senate, but the Democrat
and then elected Biden. That doesn't seem to make sense.
It never happens in these kind of numbers. because so many people go just all the way down the line, Democrat or Republican.
Which is why I think they have to do the election
there are
over.
a whole lot of questions.
But let's say this. Let's say it doesn't go there. Let's say Biden takes office. Biden-Harris takes office.
Yeah.
You've got just in the population, what did Trump get? 710 million votes.
Okay.
I think that's the number. 710 million people out there.
Wait, no. I think you mean 71 million.
Okay. So thank you. 71 million votes went for Biden. So you have 71 million people in the country most likely believing that this election was stolen from them.
That went for Trump, you mean? Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That voted for Trump, believing that this election was stolen.
Right.
What do they do?
That was my question to you about 10, 15 minutes ago.
What do they do next?
Exactly. What happens now with half of the country not believing that it was real, that it was true?
Yes. So do we have protests, I mean, I know I've seen it already. There are marches being called for to march around state capitals and say we demand a do-over, right? So what happens if that doesn't happen? First of all, you have I hear liberals, Democrats, people who voted for Biden saying, yeah, this looks really, really bad. So you have basically
not too many of them. Not too many of them. They're rejoicing.
Right. There are not too many. They're rejoicing, but you gotta, if they're privy to all these accounts of the voter fraud that we're hearing, they're like, oh boy, that looks pretty bad, but I'll take it, right? So here you have a significant part of the population of this nation not being, to some extent, not having any faith in our electoral process.
Well, here's the difference. The last 4 years, you had the entire media establishment, going against Trump.
Correct.
The next 4 years, even though that's the case, even though the masses or half the masses are against this, you will only have a little bit of Fox News, maybe Tucker and Laura Ingraham, and of course Hannity if he's still on, if they let him on.
Yeah.
And some talk radio. Rush, unfortunately, might be deceased, but other talk radio hosts. But very little of the media will be pushing back against this. The entire establishment, the media establishment, the educational establishment, and now the government establishment will be okay with this, which is really the sort of makings of what you called earlier, a tyranny.
A tyranny. So the only force, if you will, that can change this would be a purely grassroots movement.
Yeah, right. Like a revolution.
Like a revolution, it doesn't have to be violent. It could
I didn't mean a violent. I'm not.
Yes, right.
Both of us against violence.
Right. So, basically, you go to your leaders and you say, no confidence. We have no confidence in this government. We will not obey. I will not serve. Right. So you start at the local level and you just work it from there. However, my fear is that the Biden-Harris administration will start implementing restrictions on that sort of thing. So any Trump supporters, any people who want valid elections, who want elections that you can trust, they are going to be actively suppressed legally.
Yeah.
So that what you're going to have, and this is why revolution is probably an appropriate word, you're going to have people stand up and say, this is a bad law. I will not obey it.
I cannot in good conscience follow this law.
Exactly. So let's say slavery, right? Let's say the civil rights movement, right? You had the Jim Crow laws where Martin Luther King and others got up and said, I'm sorry, we're going to sit at the lunch counter, period.
But throughout the whole civil rights movement, you had the media okay with it. You had the media on their side.
Right.
Now you do not. I mean, I don't know if you believe that all that we're talking about tonight is part of a greater global movement context. But whether you do or not, there's still the powers that be are on the other side wanting wanting that to succeed.
So the question is 71 million, is that a critical mass? Is that enough to direct the fate of our nation,
so that
to
it
be a
won't go off,
corrective?
so that it won't go off the deep end.
Exactly. Right.
And so that in 4 years we'll actually have another election, and perhaps
that we can have faith in. And think about that. I think one of the things that hopefully will come out of this is that there will be at least an acknowledgement by the left, even if they don't acknowledge any fraud, there'll be an acknowledgement that 71 million people are very concerned. Therefore, we have to put some structures in place to guarantee a fair election. But that's the foxes watching the hen house.
Well, the structures in place that we don't, on November 8th, we do not know right now, is the Senate, basically. We don't know who's going to control the Senate at this moment, and on November 8th that we're speaking, it's 48-48. Couple recounts are redos,
runoffs.
Thank you. Runoffs in Georgia will probably tilt it one way or the other. That would be the government sort of taming the situation. Because if they run the Senate, they're going to just run roughshod over the country. They'll just transform the country into what they want.
And then all you have is the Supreme Court. Well, you have federal courts. You have federal courts.
You've got the courts.
You've got the courts.
Yeah, the courts, and potentially the Senate against the world.
Right. But if the Congress and the White House, if those two branches of government are all left wing, Democratic, let's say, they're going to legislate these things, and then all that's left is for the courts to declare the legislation unconstitutional.
Right. And then once or if the Senate becomes in Democratic hands, you're going to get court packing, and then we'll never have the courts again.
Exactly.
But that's hopefully that won't happen. Let me turn spiritual on you.
But it could. It's not very unlikely.
Let me turn spiritual with you. You're talking about 71 million, critical mass, all of this stuff. What is the power? Let's be honest. Instead of just saying what we're used to saying and thinking and all of that, let's think about this seriously.
Yes.
What do you think the power of true Catholics praying the Rosary every day for truth and justice to prevail in our country, culturally as well as politically? Do you think that has power, and how much?
I absolutely think that is everything. In the past 24 hours, I have talked several people off the ledge, and my point is this. We are living in a great time.
Okay.
We are living in a time where we actually can demonstrate the truth and the power of Catholicism.
Okay.
Supernaturally. So what should we be doing, right? A friend of mine said, I know this is a reference to the Rosary, and the Rosary, for those of you who don't know it, when you pray the Rosary, that's those beads that you see hanging from people's rearview mirrors in the cars with the crucifix on the end. It's a series of prayers where you're meditating on different events from the life of Jesus and the life of Mary. And biblical events. These are events through their lives that we're meditating as we're praying this. It's a meditative prayer, the Rosary is.
And the prayer is the background music, if you will, to the meditation, which is the primary thing that you're doing. It's a meditation.
That's an excellent way to put it. I like that. So a friend of mine, we call those mysteries. We're meditating on those mysteries, those events in the lives of Jesus and Mary. And there are different categories of mysteries. There are the joyful mysteries, the glorious mysteries, the sorrowful mysteries and the luminous mysteries. So the sorrowful ones, you would think of Christ's passion when he was arrested and tortured and then crucified, right? And then the joyful is the angel announces to Mary, she's going to be the mother of God, etc. And then, you know, the glorious, Jesus raises from the dead, and so on. This friend of mine says, boy, I know I should be praying, and these are assigned to different days. A friend of mine says, I know I should be praying the glorious, but I think I'm going to pray the sorrowful. And I replied, and I said, what you should be doing today, and he said, this is just how it feels today. I said, given the feeling today, what you should be doing is praying all the mysteries of the Rosary. So in other words,
leave it to you to say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the idea is, if you're distraught over this, if you fear that truth is at risk here, is at stake here, if honesty is at stake here, if decency is at stake here,
life is at stake here.
Life is whatever you believe is at stake.
Whether it be the unborn or, you know, your very own lives.
You need to get on your knees and pray 5 rosaries a day, right? You need to pray. You need to pray, because here's one of the things that I realized in my conversion to Catholicism.
Yeah.
Before my conversion, I was an atheist. I thought that I could navigate the world with my intellect and my strength and whatever.
Yeah.
When I realized that was nonsense in my conversion, what I then realized was, holy cow, all I have to do is grab my rosary. This is a rosary ring. But if I just grab my rosary, I can I'm like a commander in the army, and I can mobilize all of heaven, including the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay,
that's now I want to go beneath the surface with you, spiritually beneath the surface with you. And I'm going to ask a question from the perspective of both an agnostic and a Protestant. Okay.
Yep.
Well, maybe not an agnostic, but why can't you just say, God, here's the situation, here's what I'm feeling, please fix it, spontaneously as a prayer,
right?
Instead of doing these meditations that with the Blessed Virgin Mary on the life of Jesus and Mary.
Yeah.
Now, in other words, why are you saying that the Rosary is a weapon rather than simply spontaneous prayer is a weapon?
Yes.
Tell me the difference.
Because God became man to unite divinity and humanity as one, right? Jesus, this is particularly poignant in Catholicism. Jesus said, you eat my flesh and drink my blood, I will live in you and you will live in me, right? So in other words, when we pray, we're not treating God like we're not saying to a dog, hey, sick him, right? Go get that guy. What we're saying is, here I am, Lord. What's the plan?
Okay. Yeah.
Let's do it. Right?
How does this relate to my question?
So we collaborate with God. The prayer that you expressed is saying, hey, God, sick him. God, you fix this. What God says to us is, no, I sent you into the world.
Okay, so then how does praying a Catholic traditional prayer like the Rosary do that?
Because St. Paul says, have in you the mind of Christ. So I need to enter into the mind of Christ mystically through the sacraments, like I just referred to, eat his flesh and drink his blood, so he lives in me and I live in him. I meditate on his life. I become so intimately immersed in the life of Christ and the life of Mary that I see what Jesus or Mary would do in this scenario. I become intimately attuned.
Just for the sake of people listening, you're saying the more you pray prayers like this, these kinds of meditations, the more intimately, at least intellectually, because God gives us his divine life through the sacraments, but at least in the mind, you become more and more intimate with who Jesus is, and you are able more then to know how he would act and what he would do in these situations. And hence, by praying these prayers, you become more of a better instrument of God's will.
Yes, but
because you know what to do. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying more than that. So yes, your intellect is involved, and I think the way you're describing is it's relating to the intellect. We're understanding God.
You
so
said
therefore,
you become immersed. You said you know
right.
what he does and what he would do, and hence
Yes.
you would know what to do.
But also I talked about the oneness, Christ living in me and me living in Christ, so that I don't even have to know intellectually what the game plan is. I don't have to know intellectually what the battle plan is. I just have to be united to Christ mystically, supernaturally, sacramentally, we would say in the Catholic Church,
Right.
because it's through the sacraments, sacramentally united to
Yeah.
Christ, so that I don't have to know what the game plan is. All I do is I live my life.
All right.
And because I'm in communion with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,
Right.
I am guided to exactly where God needs me to be.
I understand. I just
exactly
need to be
what I need to speak.
I need to be specific here, just for those who are listening to this and saying I don't completely get it in their in their rational minds. So then you believe that Christ came, and in his death he established, in his resurrection he established the 7 sacraments, so that when we receive confession and particularly communion, we receive his divine life.
Baptism,
So,
confirmation,
confirmation, but
Holy
more
orders,
regularly on a regular
Yes.
basis, it's confession and communion.
This
literally unites our natural life with his spiritual, his supernatural life within us, and that's the life
called an infusion.
grace.
God is joined to us.
And another way of saying it is the life of grace. Whenever you hear that word, you're in a state of grace.
Yes.
God is living in you and living through you.
Right.
You get it? Okay, that makes sense. Now, are you saying that coupled with the sacraments, meditative prayers like this enable that life of God to permeate on a deeper level, you maintain that life of God within you, so that you become more in union with him by virtue of these kinds of prayers?
Yeah. So in other words, and I want to be careful how I say this, because a lot of New Age stuff uses this terminology too, but it divinizes us. But not that we become God, it means God is God and we are man, right? We are humans. But
God permeates you.
Exactly. God and I become one. We're distinguishable because there's still God and I. There's still a God and I. The I isn't subsumed into the God.
I understand. Just tell me this. The distinction you're making between receiving the sacraments and praying these prayers. What's the distinction and how do they work together?
Yeah.
In terms of this.
Right. So you receive Christ sacramentally, but it doesn't necessarily transform you until all of your being is
your psychological, your emotional,
your will, your intellect.
Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of these
are
things
all on board. Okay.
Are all calibrated, if you will, harmonized to the Blessed Trinity.
So
the
then
Father,
God's
Son, and Holy
life
Spirit.
is able to permeate you truly and deeper. Yes.
And then we become what the ancient church used to call alter Christus.
Another Christ. But prayers like this, you're saying, enable that to happen.
Right. Yes. It's sort of like, look, to grow a plant, you need soil, you need, nutrients in the soil, you need the seed, you need water, you need sun, you need all these things to come together. If you just have good soil, but you don't have water, that plant's not going to grow. If you just, etc.
And let me just ask you this question then, because I think a lot of people would say, well, pray the rosary every day and God will take that grace and do what he wills with it.
Yep.
You're saying, wait a minute. You're doing that so that you may be more permeated by God's divine life, so that you may do something about it. Is it both and, or is it one or the other?
It's both and, because...
Tell me about the both andness.
Yeah, so first of all, what it means is that I become, some of our listeners may have heard of the St. Francis prayer, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love, etc., etc. It goes through this litany of things. So in other words, we want God to work in us to transform us, and then because of that, through us to transform the world, right?
Now,
does
that occur by virtue of your actions, that God's grace goes through you to the world, or by virtue of your open heart
All of it.
that God's grace can, even if you
Yes.
even if you pray these prayers
Yes.
and you're a cloistered nun, you don't go out and do
I
anything.
was just going to go there. I was just going to say that.
Or you're an invalid and you really can't go out and do anything. And
Right.
or you've lost your voice.
Or it's COVID.
You lost your voice and you can't even talk to anyone. So
Yes.
you're saying that by virtue of your open heart and goodwill, by uniting yourself more with Christ,
Right.
his divine life can go in and through you
Yes.
to the world,
Into the
so
world.
that the world may be more divinized, and
Right.
that's how God can work also. So it's
Hopefully
both and.
Yes, exactly. Hopefully we've all met someone, and I'm beginning to wonder if this is really true in our day and age, but hopefully we've all met someone who, when we're in their presence, this is such a good person. This is such a good person. Oh my goodness. I'm always so touched just to be around this person. You're getting it, right? You're getting.
But let me ask you this. Would you say that God's life is going through this person to rural China, to Africa, to Australia?
Yes.
Not just people in their presence.
Yes, it certainly can.
Okay.
It certainly can, because God is infinite.
And this is what's meant by the church is a sacrament in and of herself,
yes.
right? That what is a sacrament? It's a physical thing, that a channel through which God's life goes through, right?
Yep.
So then it's possible that our prayer life and our meditation and our union with God enables us to be those kinds of channels to God's divine life, so that it will permeate to people that don't necessarily have good wills, or it might change people or convert people, and our culture could grow better.
Exactly.
And the political situation can get better.
Anyone who is right now despairing or sad or whatever you want to call it right now over the election, they have to ask themselves, how strong is my faith? Have I abandoned my faith? Have I, when the rubber hits the road, when the going gets tough, do I really believe what I say I believe on Sunday mornings? Do I really believe it? And what I say is, this is exactly the time where the church is glorified, because everything, the nature of the church, these graces, this is where they really shine. The more darkness there is, the brighter the light shines.
I give that an amen. And I also add to that, though, something that isn't positive, and that is, when you say that, do I really believe what I speak or say in the church? We have a humongous problem with Catholics not understanding what the faith is.
Right.
And so when you say, do I really believe what the church teaches?
Yes.
Do you even know what the church teaches?
Right. But here's the thing. There are people who do. There are faithful people who do.
But my point,
and like Jesus said, it just takes a mustard seed.
But my point is that we really need to step up efforts to enlighten people so that they are able to say yes to what God has asked us.
Right. Yeah.
In both faith and morals.
Here's what I would say about that. There are different gifts, right? You know as well as I do that some people have the gift for teaching. Some people just have a gift for being out there and being holy and just encountering people and loving them and whatever. So
intercessory prayer,
like you said, these nuns in a convent who never leave the convent, or monks in a monastery who never leave the monastery,
or lay
they're
people
praying for the world. Lay people, me sitting in my kitchen praying for the world, or etc.
But you're right. Everybody has different gifts to offer here.
Right. So and I know why you, Paul Murano, would be saying, "Wow, we have a real need to teach the faith right now," because you're a teacher. You have the soul of a teacher. You want to explain things. You want to dissect things, you want it, right? I completely get that. I have the same kind of gist, I guess. I don't know what you call it. But the idea is that other people are going to do other things. Some people are going to be out there preaching to the world, evangelizing. Evangelizing is different from teaching, right? They are different things. So we need all of the gifts of the church to blossom.
Charity, like Mother Teresa type charity.
soup kitchens, right? Yeah,
Kitchens,
Mother
yeah, yeah,
Teresa, soup kitchen,
yeah.
serving the sick, serving the poor. This is the way the Catholic Church, overcame its persecution in the first centuries.
Mm.
They will know you by the love you have for one another. They would go,
Yeah.
and the Romans would abandon babies because it was a girl and they wanted a boy or whatever. And
Sounds
the
like today.
Christians would go, yes, the Christians would go and collect them
You know,
and raise them. The Christians were helping the sick instead of discarding them, etc.
I've said this so many times in my writings that there is definitely a commonality between the pre-Christian world and the post-Christian world that we're
Yeah.
beginning to live now.
Right.
Definitely, and that is one of the things is there's just a lack of respect for the dignity of
For
the human
life.
person.
Right.
And so, yeah, so then if you
It-
are, wait a minute, if you're vulnerable, if you're not one of the powerful ones, you're discarded. You don't mean anything. Either you're killed before birth, or even after birth, or you're just totally discarded, and you don't mean a thing.
Right.
That is a commonality. And the second commonality, I would say, the big one, is the consolidation of power to create such a tyranny that people don't matter. So
Right.
the respect for the flourishing of each individual has no place in pre-Christian paganism or post-Christian progressive leftism.
Right.
That
Right.
is the problem that we are, and that's what we are going into in our day today in the 21st century.
Right. So anyone whose beliefs, whose what you believe the world should look like opposes what the left's view of the world looks like. I would have to say this, and this is not exactly ending on a great note, but prepare for battle, prepare to
Yeah.
suffer, prepare to be downtrodden.
And
But that's where our glory is.
yes, I would say, along with that, and I was going to ask you about this, but I'll say it now. Perhaps the most important virtue there is today, because it's so lacking and yet so needed, is that of courage and perseverance.
Yes, and it's suffering. And
Courage and
here's the thing.
perseverance.
Ask yourself this, and I ask all the listeners or viewers this question. What is the image, the icon, the logo of Christianity? I should say of Catholicism or even Christianity.
The cross.
The
Right?
cross, the
Yeah.
crucifix even.
Yeah.
Our God
Yeah.
dying on the cross. If that's, and he said to us, he said, if you would follow me, take up your cross.
Yeah.
Deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. He said in another place, if they did this to me, what do you think they're going to do to you?
Totally.
So this is what we have to embrace. Take up your cross.
The gospel message, it's interesting. First, it says, renounce your possessions. And there's a lot of that in both Matthew and Luke particularly. Renounce your possessions.
Right.
Then it says, if you love mother or father, sister or brother, a family member, I'll even throw in friends, even though that's not in the gospel, more than me, you're not worthy of me. So not only do you not only do you have to love God more than your things, but you have to love God more than your very loved ones.
Yes.
And then he says what you're talking about. Take up your cross and follow me. You have to love God more than your very life.
Yourself.
Your very self and your very life.
So your possessions, your loved ones, and yourself.
That's when you've arrived. That's when you're ready for heaven.
Right.
And I think that if you die before your spirit, your soul, your self, your will is there, perhaps that's what purgatory is for.
Right.
To enable you to get there spiritually. And that would be merciful.
The refinement
on God's part.
Exactly.
All right. Well, there you go.
Here we are. Did we figure anything out?
Well, we
was this helpful?
We certainly talked a lot.
Yeah.
Kent Niebuhr. Kent, you are, just so those who don't know, you are a father of 7 children. For the longest time, you were a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
You are a model for a lot of people who want a role model of a family member who is a good father.
I hope so.
Yep. And I would just say that I hope you come back on Beneath the Surface soon, because we've missed you here. And thank you for joining us tonight on this special election Beneath the Surface show called The Election from a Catholic Perspective. Hopefully that's what we gave you. Now, get out there, spread the truth with courage, with clarity, and with charity. Paul Murano, Beneath the Surface, where faith and reason meet, where truth, life, and love are one. Hope to see you again on our next show. God be with you and with our nation. Amen.
Amen.